Okay, good. Well, again, Mary sends her love. She is spending time with a dear friend who they minister to each other, but it's especially an important time for Mary ministering to this sweet dear friend of hers. So she's with us in spirit, but sends her love. Will be with us next Sunday. The title for today's lesson is Pushing Through the Resistance to Our Good. Anybody encounter any resistance this past week on the golf course, Jim or David? Something that happened in your life and you felt this sense of resistance? You know, our tendency is to think, well, that resistance is not good. Somehow I've missed the mark, I've made a mistake, I must not be doing life right, or this resistance wouldn't be here. The Daily Word speaks to this resistance that the man at the pool of Bethesda was experiencing. 38 years, quite a while to be stuck there and sort of a little bit on his pity pot, couldn't quite get to the waters in time when the angels stirred them and so forth. And then along comes who? Jesus, representing what? Representing Christ consciousness and representing, yes, that is the highest within us, that is always available to help us move through whatever resistance we might be experiencing to experience the greater good. One of the quotes in the Bible that's given me trouble when I first got into this teaching was Romans 8:28. Paul is writing to the church, and he says, "For God is always working for good." And then he put a qualifier in there for those who love him and seek to serve him. You know, the first part of that worked for me, for God is always working for good, but I had a little trouble with that other part because it sounded like conditional love, like this power that God is will do this, but only if you love him and are seeking to serve him. Love it or seeking to serve it. Love her or seeking to serve her. However we choose to think about God. But what I later learned, and it has become clearer in my consciousness as I've gone along, is how do we love God? How do we love God? Mayor Baba, a great avatar and teacher in my life when I was very young, said to love God, love others. And Jesus taught the importance of loving each other, didn't he? He said the greatest commandment, love God with all you have and love your neighbor as yourself. The second commandment, which is like the first. So we love God. Yes, we can sit in meditation and we can think, you know, God, I love you so much and I feel your love. And then we can come out of that and we can start down a different road that doesn't look so loving, right? But what we're looking for in our spiritual journey is as much consistency as we can have, because that's where we make the greatest progress, and that reflects in a life that is just more joyful. So, loving God is loving each other, if we just work with that idea for a little bit. And then how do we serve God? Well, we do it in a similar way, through being an instrument for light. Jesus said, yes, I'm the light of the world. You got that right, and you are that light as well. And let that light shine in a clear and strong place, because the world needs the light. And we know that that's true today, like it has always been, and that is our role to play above, I think, everything else. So, this resistance that we encounter, whatever it might look like, is always actually pushing us. The title is Pushing Through the Resistance, but that resistance is in fact pushing us to a greater experience of the divine. Does that make sense? And I made a couple of notes here, and I want you to think about this for a moment. What great good is waiting for you on the other side of what other obstacle, resistance, challenge that you must push through if you're to experience it? Just take a moment to close your eyes and ask yourself that question. On this beautiful Sunday morning, June 30th, or at another time when I'm experiencing this lesson, I pause for a moment to ask the question, what great good is waiting for me on the other side of whatever the obstacle or resistance may look like? Now, for some of us, there may be an idea that pops in our mind, or we have a feeling or a vision. And for others, it's more like time release. The day unfolds or the week begins to unfold, and all of a sudden it's like, yes, this is a greater experience of life that is waiting for me. And here is the initiative, the motivation to move through that obstacle that seems to stand in the way. Whenever you're ready, just open your eyes. Now, we know that there is in this world, and in the definition of Dr. David Hawkins, what he called power versus force. Power being of the divine, and force being from our ego nature. We see the activity of force in the world in all kinds of crazy ways. But what we're talking now is not about forcing whatever's trying to happen or whatever we're trying to move through to happen. It is really more about allowing that to happen so that we can experience more of our authentic power. So I want to talk a little bit about, to kind of maybe bring this home a little bit, a particular experience that Mary and I had along with her brother and his wife on our recent trip to France. Some of you heard a little bit about that last Sunday if you were here. We had an amazing 2.5 weeks in France, and last year we had the opportunity to go to Italy. And my desire, and Mary's very much like me in this way, when we go into a situation like that, we want to connect, just like I want to connect with you and you want to connect with me and we want to connect with each other. We want to just, it's not just, oh, I came and I saw the sights and I had a good meal and a good glass of wine or whatever the case may be, and I saw some people and saw some things like that, but didn't really have the experience of connecting. I mean, it's a long way to go and not get to connect, right? And a lot of effort and so forth. So we went and we had some powerful experiences of that, particularly in Normandy as we were there around the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And I shared with some of you that I had the opportunity to scatter some of the ashes of the wonderful vehicle that my friend Kate Seeley lived in and was a World War II veteran. She played an important role in communications with the Navy during World War II. And so that was powerful. But then we made our trip across the French countryside into the Loire Valley, and we saw some beautiful sights along the western coast. But in the Loire Valley, we found ourselves in a little town called Chinon. And Chinon is famous for the Villandry Chateau and Gardens, a beautiful, beautiful place. But we didn't know that. We went there because it was kind of on our way to what we were thinking of was a little nicer area in the Loire Valley. But we found ourselves making an appointment, a reservation through a kind of Rick Steves turned us on to it. It's called Chambre de Hôte, which is basically rooms and beds in French. And this was through the owners. They lived in a property that was hundreds of years old, and they had bought it when it was in fairly rough shape and done some work on it, worked on the gardens, and brought it to a beautiful state. The problem we found out was that the lady who was there, her name was Maud, Maud was very excited about having guests come and stay at her home, but Danielle, her husband, was not. And we learned that quickly when we got there. The four of us, and I felt a little extra responsibility because I'd made the reservation. And so we get there, and Maud kind of welcomes us and gives us, she speaks almost no English. Danielle, on the other hand, Danielle, speaks more French, of course, but also more English. And so we're there, and we're kind of excited, and we're trying to go up the steps to where we think we're supposed to be staying. And all of a sudden, Danielle, and I've got a picture of Danielle here. In fact, I'm going to hold off on that. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so that's Danielle. That's the after picture. Okay, we had to do a little work on Danielle, but Danielle did not look like this when we arrived. Danielle was anything but happy at that time. And so my sister-in-law, who had injured her ankle, is making her way kind of up the steps, sort of feebly, and all of a sudden Danielle yells out, "Stop!" in the loudest voice. And of course she stopped, and we all kind of were shocked by this and so forth. And then he proceeded to tell us that he would show us around, that we didn't need to be feeling free to look around on our own. It wasn't good. And so he did show us where we were to be. Mary and I were upstairs above their home, and my sister-in-law and brother-in-law were in a little separate area. And so we found ourselves just kind of trying to relax after being greeted in such a way. And a little bit later, while Mary was doing some resting, and I think Bill's wife, Lavina, was resting a little bit, Bill and I went for a little walk, and we kind of explored the village and found it very charming. Lots of private little gardens and so forth, and he's a gardener, so he really got into that. And a little bit later, we came back down, and we had brought a little bottle of wine, so we went to the little table outside, and we proceeded to enjoy a glass of wine. And about that time, Maud and Danielle came and joined us, and they had brought to the table a bottle of wine. And you could tell Danielle was still in his upset mode. He told us very quickly that if we were to speak to him in English, it should be strictly English, no French mixed in. And if we were speaking in French, to speak to him only in French. And so we did our best to stick with that. And he, again, was pretty conversant with English, but found a number of words difficult. And we found many words in French difficult. So I was doing my best job I could with French, sticking with it. And we were making a little headway, but not much. But as time went along, finally, Danielle was sitting across from me. His wife was here. My brother and sister-in-law were here. Mary was still resting a little bit and joined us later. And finally, he said, "Well, what brought you to France anyway?" Kind of like that. You know, here we were paying him to stay at his place. And he looked right at me and said, "Well, what brought you to France anyway?" And I proceeded to tell him about our visit to Normandy and how affected we were by that, the scattering of friends' ashes and so forth. And it took a little bit of doings, but he finally understood what I was talking about. And all of a sudden, this man who was so stern and so apparently upset just at our presence at his home softened, and he began to weep and shared in the best English that he could how affected he was by the war. This is a man who was a young boy when the war broke out and when France was occupied by the Germans. All of a sudden, the barrier that he had built around himself began to dissolve. And the resistance that he had to our being there, and we were there to hopefully have a nice time and connect in a good way, all that barrier fell away. By the time our time together was complete, Mary had joined us, and she sort of came into this dynamic where he's asking about us and our lives and so forth, and finally looked at me and said, "And what is your work?" And I explained that to him in the best way that I could, and he seemed to really take that in. In that moment, I felt our church there with him. and in that dynamic. I felt this energy right there with him in that moment. And thought about how we appear to be so different at times, different languages, different experiences, and yet we are all yearning to love and to be loved. So it was a precious time for us. And we brought that with us for the remainder of our trip. It was another 8 or 9 days that we were carrying Danielle and Maud with us. They retired to their home, and we went to our rooms a little bit later. And the next morning at breakfast, Danielle couldn't do enough for us. He was there with the French coffee press. He was there with the food. He insisted, when I just hesitated a little bit about having a second French press pot of coffee, he brought it immediately. And we spent the rest of our time there, which was a couple of more hours that morning, learning about the areas. They're the ones that sent us to Villandry, which is this amazing gardens that we spent hours in. This picture was one that he allowed us to take that morning after he'd served us breakfast, and after all that resistance was gone. We all embraced. If you've got, we'll bring up that other photo. This is Danielle and Maud, his wife, just before we left, and there were hugs all around. There were the French kiss, on each cheek all the way around. It was a beautiful, beautiful experience. And we had found in that home, which seemed to give us that mixed message, Maud with a smile and Danielle with this gruff personality, we had found a oneness and a wholeness that really blessed us the rest of the trip, even as it blesses us this morning. And so, really, when I sat with what I wanted to speak about this morning, it came to me that I should speak about how valuable it is to push through whatever resistances are there to find the greater good, to allow ourselves to experience more of life. So let me ask you to close your eyes for a moment. And as you do, I want you to revisit, if you will, whatever might have occurred in your heart or mind a little while ago when we talked about something good that is waiting. It may just be a deeper sense of peace in your life. It may be a willingness to hear more clearly the voice of Spirit. It may simply be to awaken in the morning with a fresh feeling about life, a joyfulness, a deep sense of peace and ease and grace, the very things that speak to all of us. So for just a moment, revisit that place. When you're ready, just open your eyes. The Course in Miracles, in fact, it's the lesson that was there for today. The lesson is entitled, I trust my brothers who are one with me. I trust my brothers, I trust my sisters who are one with me. And that teaching, as is the basic teaching within unity, reminds us that we are one with everyone, that there is no one to be left out of that equation. It's fairly easy, as Jesus reminded us, to love our friends, but it's a whole nother thing to love those that appear not to be our friends. And yet, in that obstacle, in that resistance, lies the greatest opportunity. In that lesson, we read, remove your focus from your brother's sins, and you experience the peace that comes from faith in sinlessness. Remove your focus from your brother's sins and experience the peace that comes from faith in sinlessness. It's a good question to ask ourselves, where is my faith? Where is my faith? Do I truly trust the teachings of unity that remind me of this oneness? Or am I still giving a little more credence to the sense of separation, the sense of, that's fine for this person, that's true for this person, but not so true for this one? It almost always, if not always, comes back to that very core teaching. And so let's close with a prayer. Loving God, we get the picture of the man at the pool of Bethesda, there for 38 years. We know that 38 is symbolic of however long it takes. And yet we also allow to come into our minds the picture of Jesus, the Christ, our great teacher and example and wayshower, who says to each of us, pick up your bed and walk. I am with you. Pick up your bed, we know, can be symbolic for be willing to stand in front of whatever obstacle is there, the appearance that you can't walk or run, the appearance that you don't have the power resident within you to make this commitment to live in this present moment, free of the past and free of the future, to be empowered in this moment in knowing all this good is waiting to unfold in a greater way in your life. And even as you and I hold this picture for ourselves and hold this picture for each other, we hold this picture for our spiritual home, Unity of Blairsville, that this beautiful community is standing in this divine idea, so willing to have faith in the sinlessness of each other, of others in the community, of this state, in this nation, in this world, that we are in this moment being, as a spiritual community, the light that Jesus reminded us of. Yes, he was speaking to us as individuals, but also speaking to us collectively. When two or more are gathered in my name, in this divine idea of wholeness and peace and oneness, there am I also, using you as an individual, using you as a spiritual community to reach across and touch others in our community, in our lives, in our families, in our worlds, and focus, instead of sinfulness, on sinlessness. Have faith in that light burning brightly within their being, put there by God. And so we just take a moment to allow ourselves to radiate that light out to family, to friends, even to those that we would call our enemies, recognizing that as we do, just like with Daniel there in Chinon, France, we meet their call for love with love. we allow ourselves to look past the appearance of gruffness or anger or even anything else to behold the truth that sets us free. And so it is. Amen. Thank you. God bless. Hey.